To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, visit gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. Sometimes, humans invent things by accident, like the microwave, which was invented when a researcher working with microwave radiation discovered it had melted the candy bar in his pocket. And in hindsight, he's probably lucky that's all that ended up melting. But a lot of human inventions come around because they fulfill a need. Like, we needed the ability to keep food cold so it wouldn't spoil, so scientists and engineers found a way to develop refrigeration technologies. Those needs often ride on the back of complex cultural shifts. As the world changes, our needs change, and we can see this integral relationship between need and invention in one of the most influential inventions of the past millennia, the printing press. Hi, I'm Rob Fuller, and this is Study Hall, Modern World History. For many of us, reading and writing can feel like a fundamental part of everyday life. We read road signs, nutrition facts, Twitter. You probably found this video by reading. It certainly wasn't my face in the thumbnail. But for most of human history, reading just wasn't a part of most people's lives. That's partially because there was less opportunity for education, and partly because there was less to read. Texts were expensive, education was expensive, and most of the things that you needed to know you could simply store up here. But it's also because people didn't need to read. Societies weren't built on the assumption that literacy was a given like they often are now. So how do we get from that culture to our own? Reading had to become important. We needed the, need to read. To find out what made that need for literacy, it's nice to look at what people were reading. Some of the biggest early writings were religious texts, and from the 14th to 16th centuries, a few religions were focusing on using those texts to expand. In particular, across the centuries, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam all actively sent missionaries to distant lands to find new believers, and religious texts played big roles in that expansion since missionaries needed copies to spread the word. All three religions also dedicated a great deal of effort to preserving and spreading religious texts. In Catholic monasteries, monks copied the Bible by hand, one page at a time. And when the Mongols invaded Korea and destroyed the Tripitaka Koreana, a collection of important Buddhist writings carved onto wood blocks, the ruling dynasty had the entire collection of 80,000 wood blocks recreated. So the texts were important, but they weren't always important to everyone. For a lot of early human history, religious doctrine was controlled by the religious leaders and others in power who could read and write. They read the sacred texts and decided what would be read to the masses at services. In some cases, commoners were banned from even owning a copy of these books. But by the 15th and 16th centuries, things were changing, and we see some Christian and Muslim sects actively promoting literacy so believers could have a direct relationship with God through reading the text themselves. The Islamic world of the 15th century spread from the gold and salt empires of West Africa all the way to the Pacific islands of modern-day Indonesia. But it wasn't a monolithic force. There were multiple groups or sects with different beliefs. And one of the most influential groups in this time period was Sufism. Sufism is perhaps best known for its religious dances or the poetry of Rumi, but at its core, Sufism is a form of Islamic mysticism, which argues for a personal connection with Allah, and being able to read the Quran and other religious texts is an important part of that. Sufism had a lot of support in the Ottoman Empire and Egypt, especially amongst the rural and working poor. And as its influence grew, Sufism was able to promote formal education as a tool to strengthen faith. Children would begin at primary schools known as kitab, and if they were rich, go on to attend madrasas for higher education. These institutions became commonplace not just in major cities like Cairo, but also in small towns and villages. In 14th century Europe, we see a similar movement develop within Christianity. A group of monks in the Netherlands formed into a brotherhood known as the Devotio Moderna. They thought the rituals practiced in Catholic Christianity were empty gestures, so this movement turned away from ritual and instead focused on community and the inner spiritual life. Much like Sufism, followers of the Devotio Moderna, this modern devotion, focused on their personal relationship with God and promoted education as a way to develop and strengthen that relationship. One group in the movement, called the Brethren of the Common Life, focused on establishing schools that would later train intellectuals and religious leaders like Erasmus and Martin Luther. So we see a rise in readership appearing as different religions expand and engage more deeply in their faiths. Their investment in education and emphasis on personal reading made these world religions powerful forces for spreading literacy. But religion wasn't the only cultural force moving towards literacy. Like we talked about in our episode on gunpowder, governments were changing too. Rulers across Afro-Eurasia were in the process of establishing bureaucracies, which are governments run by trained professionals, not just the paperwork we associate with the word today. And a key part of that training? Reading. Because, well, there was a lot of paperwork. In China, the imperial bureaucracy had a history going all the way back to the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BCE. Scholars earned their place in the bureaucracy by passing a rigorous test known as the Civil Service Exam, based heavily on the works of Confucius. Being highly literate was a requirement for serving in this government. The same is true in the Ottoman Empire, starting around the 14th century. It had a court system built on paperwork. Courts expected people to have physical copies of property deeds, tax registers, marriage certificates, court records, you name it. Additionally, witnesses in court would be required to provide both oral and written testimony. And for those witness statements to be valid, they would need to be notarized, which means that an official signed off that the statements were accurate. So we can see why today we associate bureaucracy with paperwork. And to make all that paperwork possible, the Ottoman Empire developed a class of professional scribes who were responsible for producing and authenticating documents. This class had to be educated to read and write in order to produce the slew of documents necessary. And we can see something similar again in Europe. As bureaucracies developed, those officials had to be literate in order to carry out the king or queen's orders and take care of legal proceedings. But despite all of these investments in literacy by religions and governments, there was still one big problem. Everything was handwritten by scribes, which takes a lot of labor and materials, which means it took a lot of money. Even as the need for literacy was expanding, it was still fairly limited to the higher tiers of society. But that was all about to change with movable type. In the 15th century, a German goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg produced a movable type printing press. Letters were cast into little pieces of metal so they could be assembled into text, slathered with ink, and then pressed onto a page, which is a lot quicker than writing by hand. Plus, once you had the print assembled for one page, you could just re-ink it to make multiple copies. And movable type showed up in a few other places too, but Gutenberg's printing press by far made the biggest splash. It made reproducing documents faster and cheaper, which threw gas on the fire of literacy. Essentially, words became cheaper, which made them even more accessible. And as words became more accessible, that meant information became more accessible. Ideas now moved faster between people and places. Today, we take information for granted, as there's a wiki for just about everything. But before, information was largely centralized to those in power, like priests or bureaucrats. If a book needed to be printed, it had to be funded, which usually fell to the rich. But now that power was entering the hands of more common people. People's ideas didn't just have to spread by word of mouth anymore. That meant ideological movements about politics and religion weren't restricted to those in power. And we can see that with the establishment of Protestantism by Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a 16th century Catholic monk living under the Holy Roman Empire in modern-day Germany. He was deeply religious, but struggled with some of the teachings of the Catholic Church, like the policy of indulgences where one could pay money to the church to forgive sins. Eventually, he decided that enough was enough and wrote down his criticisms of the church in a document called the 95 Theses. He may or may not have nailed this document to the church doors in Wittenberg as the story goes, but they had an impact either way, because of the printing press. Luther and his peers printed and spread copies of his writings all across Germany, but they quickly spread even farther than that to all across Western Europe. That was only the start though, as Luther kept writing and spreading his message, which drew the ire of the Roman Church, eventually leading to him being kicked out of the church entirely. But this didn't stop him from writing and publishing. Importantly, he translated the Bible into German, the language of the common people. After all, what good is a printing press if you're writing in Latin, the language used only by the nobility and the church? Luther used publishing to reach out directly to the people, in the language of the people, and spread a new denomination of Christianity. Lutheranism caught on across the Holy Roman Empire, and it led the way for other Christian sects to break away from the Catholic Church in Rome as well, establishing a protest movement that we still refer to today as Protestantism, or Protestantism. Printing allowed Luther to break the church's monopoly on ideas. By 1559, the Catholic Church realized the threat was not just Luther, but the written word itself. and so it published its first index of prohibited books, which, as you could guess, prohibited books. Now, it may seem strange to bring up the idea of book banning when we're talking about reading and publishing, but this backlash is kind of a sign of progress. Previously, there wasn't a need to make a list of banned books because most people couldn't read and most books weren't easily accessible. The index of prohibited books was only necessary because people had more access to books and were reading them. The Catholic Church wasn't the only one to start banning books either. Other religions and governments joined in the project of banning books, an issue that still continues to this day. But printing gave people the power to spread new ideas, and that made ideas much harder to repress. The printing press didn't come out of nowhere. The timing was great for some, but the demand, the need for this technology was already there. A growing number of religious groups wanted their followers to be able to read about their beliefs for themselves, and rulers were working hard to create a government of loyal, well-educated bureaucrats. The technology filled that need. But that's not the end of the story. Over the next 2 centuries, this reading revolution would lead to the rise of newspapers, new religious movements, publicly funded secular education, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, the educated masses should have a say in how religions, governments, and societies are run. Efforts to ban books didn't end. Why would it? People who banned books feared an educated world. But those efforts consistently failed because it's hard to stop an educated society from continuing to learn and grow. If you're enjoying Study Hall Modern World History and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, visit gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.